and welcome to Bud's RPG Review, where I give my thoughts on role-playing games, card games and board games. Today's review is Impossible Landscapes for Delta Green the Role-Playing Game by Arcdream Publishing, Part 3. In this video I'll be covering the first part of the campaign, the Night Floors. Before we go into it, it's worth mentioning that the Night Floors existed long before Impossible Landscapes. Originally contained in 1999's Delta Green Countdown as a standalone scenario to demonstrate how the mythos of Hasta and the King in Yellow could work in the setting. This version was for Call of Cthulhu 5.5 edition. It was later released as a text-only document on Dennis the Twiller's blog in 2008 as a 27-page PDF, and has many subtle differences to the version here, which has been expanded and revised to fit the story of the campaign. I've put a link below to the older version if you would like to check it out. The chapter begins with a quote from the King in Yellow, which again is very appropriate to what is to come, and then we arrive at part 1. The operation is set in Manhattan in the summer of 1995. Abigail Wright, a 26-year-old artist, has vanished from her apartment, last seen around 4 days before she was missing on the 4th of June by her father, Thomas Wright, who is himself a Nassau County police officer who knew the right strings to pull in order to involve the NYPD. At the time of her disappearance, she'd lived in Manhattan for about 7.5 years, only going to the police once in 1994 to report a mugging. She was moderately successful, having a distinguished academic record and list of former clients, and had held her first show at a trendy downtown art gallery called the Mercury, selling 15 pieces of art. 6 months later, she vanished. On the 4th of June 1995, the NYPD entered her studio in the Macallister Building and found something that was positively bizarre. Every surface was covered in scraps of junk that had been attached with glue or tape, with only the floor being clear. All seemingly random things such as dentures, clothing, newspapers in different languages, and jewellery. She'd been known as being quite fastidious, and there were no signs of a struggle of any kind, and the neighbours didn't know anything useful. Several leads were chased, but nothing uncovered. The apartment was visited 4 times by the NYPD and twice by detectives. Here we have our first in the field section, Stages of the Night Floors, where it goes into how this scenario being an entry point to the surreality of the King in Yellow. There is the normal world where the agents are confident in reality, momentary glimpses where they have bizarre singular encounters with the oddities of the Macallister Building, while everything else surrounding them stays normal, unfolding impossibility where they meet the tenants of the Macallister Building and come upon the Night Floors which shakes their reality, and finally existential terror and escape, where they become lost in the Night Floors, reality fades and they struggle to make their way back. Moving back to the scenario, we discover that 2 months after her disappearance, Abigail's credit card was used in Maryland to buy cigarettes at a gas station, with the employees having no recollection of the sale, not recognising photographs of her and having no CCTV. Additionally, the signature was different, though it was her name. The Macallister Building tenants were questioned again, but the same dead ends were reached. In Wright's apartment, an occult symbol was discovered scrawled in gold ink, which caught the attention of a Delta Green friendly in the FBI, Sandra Levinson. She duly reported this to the leader of the New York M-Cell, Agent Marcus, or Dr. Marvin Bloom. We then move on to The Truth. Abigail has come under the influence of the King in Yellow after purchasing the book in an unnamed bookshop. More on that later. Reading it opened her mind to Carcosa, and she went on to share it with her fellow tenants, and the infection took hold, opening a passageway to the night world. This only appears after sunset. Wright subsequently disappeared into these infinite rooms, and all of the remaining tenants live a double life, being completely oblivious as to what happened to Abigail during the day, and travelling to the night world in the evening where they work on shared obsessions. The infection is rapidly spreading and will eventually absorb them. Okay, so now on to the investigation itself, Operation Alice. The agents are summoned to Washington Square Park at 4:45 p.m. on the 10th of August 1995 via usual Delta Green means. When they arrive, they find it filled with performers and tourists, think clowns, jugglers, musicians and the like. Marcus will, one by one, pick up the agents and while pointing at the landmarks, explain the operation. They find out that they've been granted clearance to help the FBI collect and document evidence from the home of a missing woman who is suspected to have been kidnapped. Anyone from law enforcement is deputised, others are hired as advisors. They're there to catalogue every item in Abigail's apartment. In addition to this, a symbol that has links to demonology and the occult has been found there. Marcus has no other details on it than that. They are to investigate the location and decide if an unnatural influence is behind her disappearing, stopping or destroying it if that is the case. He gives them a leather valise which has temporary FBI credentials for all of them, a New York Post article on her disappearance, the police and FBI files, a Polaroid photo of her taken over a year ago, and the address of the Macallister Building along with freshly cut keys. After informing them on this, he will answer questions, though it is stressed he knows nothing about the yellow sign or the King in Yellow. We have another in the field section as an encounter in Washington Square Park, whereby any agent who has a corruption score seeing a scene with a dancing clown that performs on stage with a paper dragon differently than everyone else, instead seeing the yellow sign in the patterns in the air. If anybody tries to break up the scene, the crowd will suddenly disperse in all directions and the clown will be lost in the confusion. Those with no corruption rating seem nothing of interest. It then gives us some details on Agent Marcus. His actual name is Dr. Marvin Bloom and Sandra Levinson's contact. She informed him of the strange symbol. He only appears in person rarely after the initial contact, always setting out the rules for the meeting. He is paranoid about Delta Green agents being hunted by a counter-conspiracy. If the agents need help from him, he will move the request up the command chain for simple tasks. He is very rarely available for a phone call and will never reveal his actual name, telling the agents to do the same, which the players could find unsettling. It makes the point that he could be a replacement agent if any are lost. Next we move on to the Macallister Building. It is located at 210 East 32nd Street, New York, New York, and was built in 1924, being a classic brownstone with 3 stories, a basement and a faux castle design, replete with fake portcullis above the door, ramparts on the windows and ledges alongside concrete gargoyles. The front door has a buzzer that can be used internally to unlock the front door that looks to be from the 1960s. The foyer has a marble floor and has tenant mailboxes and is littered with junk mail, pizza coupons and the like. The roof is tar paper and covered with vents, old aerials and air shafts, and the basement can only be accessed from the street outside. Inside it has a single hallway that runs the length of the building, replete with plush burgundy carpet, and each floor has 2 apartments on each side. There are 11 apartments here, but only 5 are occupied, and for New York City standards they are large and have kitchenettes, separate bathrooms and roll-top baths. The secret of the Macallister Building is that 5 months before she vanished, Abigail had read The King in Yellow and it changed her. She convinced the other tenants to read it and in turn they were influenced. The apartment started to change. Strange people would appear, stepping out of things like broom cupboards. Unknown voices were heard in unknown languages, having arguments. Someone started typing out a play starring the tenants and leaving it under their doors at night. This came as a wonderful change to them, giving them inspiration for their art, and as the building changed, so did they, although Abigail took a different path. Her art passed through the madness and came out enlightened. She used the change and set up her shrine in a way to influence those that view it to become more susceptible to the King in Yellow. The next section is one called Disinformation. Here it goes into what the agents can discover should they look into the history of the building. If they examine the city records using the likes of bureaucracy or skill in architecture, they can uncover the original permit, dated 27th May 1921, where it is noted that it started as the home of Henry M. Lundeen between 1886 and 1952. It has been amended on the 2nd of March 1953 to show it was refitted into an apartment, with the architect being listed as A. Darabondi, which is spelled incorrectly. If the agents are willing to spend around $200, they can discover the blueprints and have a copy made. These are quite mundane, aside from a piece of elegant cream stationery from Hotel Broadalbin with no address listed, but hailing from New York City. Scribbled on it is the line, "I saw the rooms tonight at dusk." A search will uncover no records of such a hotel. If they search on the fledgling internet of 1995, they can find recently digitised records for the building, which details its construction date, completion date, and notes showing the various sales, with it eventually coming into the hands of Artlife in 1967. One website will mention the architect, Asa Darabondi, was infamous for his involvement in a murder case, but nothing else is mentioned. If they look into the city criminal records, they can find that the architect Asa Darabondi, who disappeared in 1950 and thought dead, is suspected to have murdered between 5 and 20 children by drowning, and that Charles Lundeen, the son of the owner of the building, hanged himself there on the 30th of August 1950. Strangely, it shifts back to the story here rather than continuing on with the disinformation, and continues with the history of the Macallister Building. Abigail's story carries on with the unknown fact that a homeless woman had found her card in the garbage outside the building after finding its way to Maryland. It has no connection to the case. It makes the point that at this stage, Abigail is lost to the night world, moving closer to meeting the king himself, and despite her not being in the building, something is not right there. Subtle changes during the day, but a different animal during the night time. This has not been seen by the FBI or NYPD, as they have only been there during the daytime. At night, a doorway, described as a cancer of reality, appears in the exit to the roof, where strange, impossible scenes play out in the endless night floors. Reality is unstable here. In addition to this, the tenants change in the evening, with their smiles shifting to terrible grins, and their daytime confusion as to Abigail's whereabouts is replaced with knowledge of where she is. They are linked, feeding on each other. They never sleep, and when their imaginations consume them, the building will be forever lost to the night floors. The Macallister Building is owned by Artlife, a non-profit co-op that supports artists and is in turn supported by other famous artists. It is located quite near to the Macallister Building and run by Cynthia Lachance, a wealthy art collector who likes giving artists a chance. She will fully cooperate with the authorities and knows of Abigail's disappearance as well as the other tenants. She knows nothing on the night floors, nor the night manager who the tenants may mention. More on him later. There is an Exion section called Threats in the Photo. Here it talks about populating some photos of various points in the campaign with important characters. For example, a travel brochure with the rogue Delta Green agent Emmett Mosby in it, or Abigail Wright in a book published 43 years ago. These serve to not only creep the players out, but to also raise their corruption levels and sap their sanity. After this brief interlude, we get back to the disinformation with regards to researching the Macallister Building. Further searching into criminal records, the agents can come upon some black and white crime scene photos of the dead Henry Lundeen that shows a fat man sprawled on a landing wearing a white mask that is devoid of expression. Looking into Asa Darabondi, using the likes of skills in bureaucracy, history or architecture, can uncover several books about him, in which they can learn that he was known as the Picasso of architecture and designed strange, misshapen constructs called Thought buildings, built between 1905 and 1921, that he designed after an alleged religious revelation and sometimes a drug experience. It mentions him residing in an unnamed midtown hotel, and that 9 buildings he built are still standing in New York City, though they are quite mundane compared to his other structures. They can discover that he disappeared in 1950, and that he is suspected of murdering at least 5 children by drowning, though is speculated to have done many more. When he vanished, he left the drowned body of Emily Sauer behind, along with a logbook that appears to track his murders and huge debts. They can discover a book called The Devil's Craftsman, which contains a photo of Darabondi standing in front of an Art Deco hotel with a B on each door. Observant agents can notice a park reflected in the hotel window, which native New Yorkers will know as the Eternal Life Flagstaff, but upon investigation, no hotel is there. The hotel in question is Broadalbin and is only discovered when specific conditions are met. Jumping back to Lachance, she'll mention, if asked, that the residents have not paid their rent recently, and in another 4 weeks a collection agency will be involved. She's been to the building, but the residents have refused to talk to her. She'll mention that she's never had to evict a whole building at the same time. As circumstances would have it, Lachance's brother Damien was allegedly murdered by Asa Darabondi, though she knows nothing of this. Okay, so we then move to the agents arriving at the Macallister Building. They'll be met by NYPD Detective Graham Giordanda, who is currently in charge of the case. He is eager to get on with things, and will mention that he's never seen anything like the shrine, giving them his card and leaving. He will stay out of the way unless requested. He is very religious and can be recruited into Delta Green, though will view any unnatural encounter through the lens of the Bible. Next, we move on to the apartment and shrine. Before we move on to describing the room and shrine itself, we have a section called In the Field, Effects of the Shrine. Essentially, for every 3 or more hours that someone is alone in the apartment, or if they spend the night there, they need to make a SAN roll. The first time they fail, they have the sensation of being watched, costing 1 SAN. The second failure causes the loss of 1 SAN due to feelings of helplessness. They can hear voices laughing and crying permeating through the walls, though they cannot be made out. If checked, it will be discovered to be coming from a wall that joins an empty hallway. This causes another SAN roll with the loss of 1 for failure. On the third failure, they lose 1 SAN from the unnatural as they see a person passing the doorway of the bathroom in the apartment. A white man with white shoes holding a briefcase. There is nowhere in the bathroom to come or go to, and this gains anybody seeing it a point of corruption, which will allow them to access the night floors. More on that later. Moving back to Abigail's apartment, it is what is described as a testament to methodical madness. All surfaces apart from the floor are covered in layers of objects in some kind of strange but meaningful pattern. They're hard to pull from the wall due to the epoxy used, and only a tape player and a CD Walkman have been taken off so far. Nothing at this point appears to work. The linoleum is showing on the floor and there is no furniture. Those who search the apartment with high enough skill can find a tiny microphone hidden under the hallway rug next to the apartment. The wire leads to the apartment of Thomas Manuel. More on him in a bit. Here we have a copy of the blueprint of the Macallister Building, though see if you can spot the mistake. The agents find a cardboard box that is labelled for the case that has 4 Polaroid cameras and 100 packs of film, which amounts to 800 photos. Also, there are latex gloves, evidence bags and stickers and the like. It can be discovered that the job should take between 3 to 8 days depending on how many people are doing it, and each day spent doing it allows 2 search rolls, with successful rolls yielding bizarre items and clues. Now bear in mind that the clues are not presented in any order. I'm going to go through them so that you have an understanding of what is found, though I do have some ideas on the order that they should be found in. More on that in another video. The first up is known as the diagrams. These, illustrated here, are meticulous illustrations for some kind of machines drawn with pen on paper napkins that have GBR emblazoned on them in gold. One is labelled Leão and the other Escriba. This is Portuguese for the lion and the scribe. Anyone who is skilled in engineering can try to fathom them, but can't due to something fundamentally wrong that they can't put their finger on. They can take a small sandhit from this. A day after they have been catalogued, they vanish no matter where they are. The next is the letterhead. It is a page of good quality cream coloured stationery that looks new. It has a header that reads Hotel Broadalbin, New York City, though no address. It has a basic map scribbled on it which eventually leads to JL Bottle, though it is obviously not the Macallister Building. It is used in the Whisper Labyrinth. More on that later down the line. Anyone examining the paper forensically can find out that it was manufactured in 1933 and is identical to that found with the Macallister Building blueprints. After this is the Macallister map. It is drawn on butcher block paper and shows a basic floor plan of the Macallister Building. There are various notations such as Mr. Castaigne, man with briefcase and white shoes, and dead guy in mask. We have another portion of disinformation, and this concerns Hotel Broadalbin. A record search will turn up that there has never been a hotel of that name in New York City, though clues as to where it is can be found in the book The Devil's Craftsman and from the bookshop owner B.R. Robert. More on him later. We then have the play. Pages of this should be found each day, though disappointingly we only have one here, meaning you would have to put them together yourself. They star the Tenants as well as the Super, Mr. Castaigne, the Encyclopedia Salesman, Mark Rourke and the Dog. We have the receipt. This is made out to Abigail Wright, though the signature is a scrawl. It is for $850 or 1 month's rent for July for apartment 10B, which the agents can discover has not had the tenant for almost 4 years. Research into the type of paper will show that it has not been made for around 50 years. There is the sheet music. It is a series of dots and lines with the words, "Let the red dawn surmise what we shall do when this blue starlight dies and all is through." Anybody with a bit of skill in music can realise this, and a deep dive into researching it can find out it is a poem called Songs of the Sea Children by Bliss Carman, a former poet laureate of Canada. Anyone who plays it and sings the lyrics gains a +1 corruption. The next clue is the seal. It is a torn sheet of linen parchment that is inscribed with an occult symbol in golden ink. A strange thing happens if it is removed from the wall. As it is done so, a blasting cacophony of sound hits the apartment. If they're looking outside at the time, they see a cab driver using his horn at a homeless man who stumbles across the road with a snake around his neck. Rushing outside, they seem to vanish. Those versed in the occult who make their roll can confirm it is a symbol associated with demonology. If they have a higher skill, they can determine that it is the mark of Person, a demon that is detailed in the Ars Goetia. This can be discovered using the website demonweb101.com, which will describe the demon as a man with a lion's face carrying a viper riding a bear, heralded by the sound of trumpets. Once catalogued, it vanishes the next day. It's worth mentioning that Demonweb 101 is an actual website designed by Artdream Publishing, which contains this information. Be sure to let your players check it out. We have an in-the-field action called Person, the Secret and the Divine, where it mentions that those with a corruption of more than 2 have a chance of meeting Person. More on that later. The next clue is the walkie-talkie. This is a backpack-sized radio which, though glued to the wall, still has the control panel and telephone accessible. If someone tries to remove it, they will split the battery, doing a point of damage and rendering it permanently useless. If someone actually turns the radio on, they will occasionally hear voices through the static saying seemingly random words. Those skilled in military science can recognise it as a SCR-300 that was used by the World War II Allies, and it is in excellent condition. If the serial number is taken, it can be tracked using the right skills to Private Reuven G. Labelas, who was killed in action on the 17th of December 1944 at the Battle of the Bulge. There is an extant to do with the walkie-talkie called Conversations with Carcosa. It is actually a conduit to those entities that inhabit the night world, and almost anything can come out of it, though this is down to the handler. It recommends secretly recording the agents using the walkie-talkie and playing it back to them in the future when they use the satellite phone in a volume of secret faces. We then move to the airline ticket. It looks like a machine-printed airline ticket for Whitwer, Michael, from Las Vegas to Boston, though the date is the 6th of June 2015. If the name is searched, the agents can discover that Michael Whitwer is a 15-year-old boy who lives in Michigan. He is actually a future DEA and Delta Green operative known as Agent Vega, and further investigation into the ticket will show that it is nothing like what is currently used by United Airlines. The next is the yellow sign. Nobody has, as yet, seen the sign. If it is removed and the agents look at it, the room will suddenly have a feeling of melancholy, anxiety and paranoia. A sand check needs to be made, and those that fail gain a point of corruption and become compelled to share it. The information is contained way further on in the book, so to help understand this, I will explain the effect at this point. The yellow sign is a symbol that prepares the mind of those that view it to be more recipient to the forces of the King in Yellow. It makes the point that it is often neither yellow nor even a sign, usually appearing as a geometric shape, snake-like shape, sometimes described as a sigil, eye, branch or even a dragon that can be copied by normal means. It seems to change to the viewer in each moment and to each viewer. It is a harbinger of fear, insanity and horror. Just looking at it costs 0 or D4 san from helplessness, though those who pass see nothing unusual, being unable to remember what it looked like exactly. Those that lose san gain +1 corruption and feel compelled to have the release of sharing it with others. If they try to sleep without sharing it, they have horrific nightmares, suffering sleep deprivation penalties. After they share it at least once, this compulsion goes and everything goes back to a form of normality. Those agents who are affected by it should note on their character sheet, "I have seen the yellow sign." Moving back to the shrine, we have the final piece, a photograph of a middle-aged couple in a living room. Both have their eyes scratched out, and anyone having a good look at the photo can spot a creepy arm in a Harlequin costume behind them that seems very out of place. This is Thomas and Ellen Wright, Abigail's parents. We have a disinformation section on Abigail's father. Her mother died in 1988. He is a Nassau County police officer that lives around an hour from the city. Abigail remained close to her father, though since she vanished, Thomas has had a bad time of things. He believes Abigail is dead and has friends covering for him in work. He lives on fast food and is even sleeping in the squad room as he feels so lonely. Should the agents contact him, he has little to add, though if he sees anything other than Macallister Building, he will quickly become obsessed, relocating to the city and cashing in a backlog of sick days. He will park his car nearby and enter the building as he has a key, confronting any tenant, and it won't take long for him to find the knife flaws. It makes the point that Thomas could make an ideal replacement for a lost agent, as he will never give up searching for Abigail. The next section is entitled Tenants of the Macallister Building. It has a list of the apartments, along with who is there and what they do, and a description of them, and then we move on to the people who live there. It makes the point that during the day they are pretty normal. Artists and writers who live there due to Artlife, who are actually trying to scale back the people living there as they want to renovate it. This explains why so many apartments are empty. The first person up is Thomas Manuel. He is a 26-year-old Hispanic man who is a talented painter who lives across the hall from Abigail's apartment. By day, he has nothing but praise for her, calling her Laura, which is her middle name, suggesting she may have left New York City because she was free-spirited. The state of her apartment puzzles him, and he claims to have heard nothing unusual, remembering the last day he saw her as the 28th of May 1995. As far as he is concerned, nobody strange came or went from there, and he didn't see her removing furniture. His own apartment is fairly austere, with no art of any kind there, making it look like a hotel room. If asked, he will claim that the night manager, Mr. Castaigne, allows him to work in the basement at night, and that is where his materials are stored. He has not sold a painting in 4 months and vanished from the social scene, with some thinking he has a drug addiction, joined a new religion, or the like. At night, Thomas is a different prospect altogether. He will tell the agents that Abigail left the building with an encyclopedia salesman who lives on the 6th floor, which does not exist during the day. Also saying that he told the authorities again and again, but they haven't followed it up. The FBI and NYPD have no knowledge of this. He will say that on the 28th of May 1995 there was a going-away party held in the smoking lounge on the 4th floor, telling the agents that she had figured it out and could now move upstairs with the others. He can be found in his apartment listening to his cassette deck on his headphones or recording Abigail's apartment using the small microphone. Occasionally he will go into the basement and work on his paintings. He can be heard talking to someone but is always found alone. If he is confronted about the tapes or conversations, he will explode into rage, demanding to be left alone, insisting on privacy. He will sometimes play with the dog on the night floors, throwing the ball for it. This can be heard throughout the building. He's not seen his family in 3 months, with the building preventing him from doing so. His parents, Elaine and Arthur, live on Long Island and had previously been close to Thomas. He has in recent months become more distant and not spoken to them in months. On the 31st of March 1995, they tried to contact him at the Macallister Building, but were turned away by a man with a suitcase and a large grey dog who told them Thomas didn't live there anymore. They are currently at a loss as to what to do and could cause an issue if the agents show up, as they will bombard the FBI with phone calls. We have another disinformation section called Investigating the Tenants. If local shops are questioned, they will mention that they've not seen these regulars in weeks, and if phone records are checked, the last call was made from the building on the 19th of April by Roger Caron to his editor, Carmen Wagner. According to records, the power and cable have been shut off, but strangely it all still functions. Michelle Van Fitz doesn't attend the writing club anymore, and Caron no longer goes to sci-fi conventions. Their credit cards and bank accounts have not been used in 3 weeks, and no cash withdrawals have been made. If Manuel's apartment is investigated by day, a lot can be picked up. He has a lot of high-end stereo equipment, but no books, magazines, cassettes or CDs, claiming he got rid of it all as it was a distraction and that the equipment was a gift. A human role can show that he is clearly lying. If it is searched, a hidden stash of oddities can be found in a plant base. There is an incomplete copy of the play, a bronze medallion and a number of unlabelled cassettes. If played, all that is recorded is the ambient noise of an apartment. Some portions of the play are underlined in red ink. The amulet can be opened up as it is a locket and used to contain 2 pictures. One has been scraped off and the other shows a beautiful woman from around 1900 with long brown hair. Closer examination will reveal the name Ambrose in the filigree. Should the wire to Abigail's apartment be found in the daytime, Thomas will be genuinely puzzled. The food in his fridge is months out of date, though not rotten, and if removed from the building it instantly putrefies, causing a SAN hit and +1 corruption gain by those that see this. Should his workspace in the basement be looked into, agents can discover that one of the rooms has been converted into a workspace that smells of paint and thinner. A black canvas labelled My Great Work sits blank, and there is a stack of 3 plastic pails of linseed oil with a note pinned to them that says, "For Sammy to pick up." Should this space be examined later down the line, the oil is gone, and Thomas will claim that his friend Esther is painting her house. There are some paintings stacked nearby that they can look at. There is a dancing child-sized clown that looks like the one in Washington Square Park that also exists in the night world. More on that later. There's one of a fire in a house with a white-faced spectre standing at the top of the stairs in the middle of the blaze. The rug it is sitting on is an odd aquamarine colour. There is the twins. This shows a lean man with thinning, wispy blonde hair wearing a hospital gown looking into a mirror where his twin is deformed, muscular and with a misshapen head. If the My Great Work canvas is looked at night, the agent must roll SAN. If they fail, they lose 1 point and gain +1 corruption as they start feeling the building is filled with people just out of vision. If they ask Thomas about the King in Yellow at night, he will happily chat about the plot of the play and can describe the book as being bound in red, saying that he thinks Van Fitz has the copy from Wright. Next up is Roger Caron. He is a 43-year-old Caucasian who is a sci-fi author who had a series called Night Sea, which was moderately successful. He will claim to have not known Abigail well, describing a few complaints at New Year 1994. They rarely spoke. Anytime he is questioned, it is clear he has not left his apartment in some time. His sink is overflowing with dishes, there's dirty laundry everywhere, and it stinks of sweat. Also, there are a lot of high-end liquor bottles, all empty. By day, he is fairly unassuming. His clothes never match, his hair is always misaligned, and his apartment feels old and dated. He knows Thomas Manuel and Louis Post, but tends to stay at home reading, writing and watching TV. At night, he can be seen slipping out of his apartment and going upstairs to the ninth floors. When he returns, he will smell of cigars and brandy with exotic fruit in his pockets. If he is asked about Abigail at night, he will claim she never left, saying that she lives on 6 in apartment 12A. If asked about the ninth floors, he will innocently claim that they've always been there and that everyone should know. If he is asked about the going away party, he will say he didn't have a good time and left, refusing to speak any more about it. He seems open and friendly, but is covering up his true nature, one of paranoia. Should the agent contact his editor, Carmen Wagner, she will say that since the 19th of April, he has made her job far more difficult. He had a strange call with her on that day and has not spoken to her since. He's missed 2 sci-fi conventions and has not turned in his next Night Sea novel. She has a tape recording of the last time they spoke. In addition to this, she's been getting odd, recurring phone calls at home at night, and they're all the same. It is an unknown man that always says, "Start with Peter Deveras," and then lists names. Should the agent take one of these calls, the voice will start the saying and cut itself off saying, "It's not your cue yet," then hang up. If they tape the line and ask Wagner to not hang up, they can make a note of their names. A search of them will be a list of the missing or murdered kids from between 1921 and 1950, almost all linked to Asa Darabondi. We then have a disinformation section called Investigating Caron by Day. As with Thomas, the food is well out of date and will putrefy instantly if taken outside the building. Should the agent search his apartment at night, they find a number of disturbing things. His word processor, though password protected, can be bypassed quite easily. There are 64 files with short story titles, however each one has a single letter typed over and over again. If they are read in date order, they spell the message, "Smooth is the hand that makes the world, and steady is the mind that grasps it." In addition to these files, there is a copy of the mysterious play. It's called Night Floors, and Caron is credited as the author. If they're in possession of the play, they can compare his to it and realise that he has simply modified it to his own ends. Moving back to Wagner, it states that she doesn't know what to think and honestly doesn't care as long as the book is written, and it is worth mentioning that she won't mention the calls until asked. It also makes the point that Carmen Wagner was born on the 30th of August 1955, the same day Her Grey Song opened and closed in one day and cleaned up with Operation Bristol. Also, it was the 60th anniversary of the final performance of Le Roy and Joan in Paris in 1895. Next, we move on to Michelle Van Fitz. She is a 20-year-old Caucasian woman and feminist author. She's actually not much different day or night and just seems to dislike everyone, law enforcement more. She's a passionate author and has no friends or family and is not friendly with anyone in the Macallister Building. She doesn't watch TV or listen to the radio, nor read newspapers, and spends her time writing feminist poetry that seems to alienate people by her obscure use of other books. She recently sold her first collection and has won local awards for her poems. Her apartment by day is covered in bookshelves filled with ones on sociological study, Leninism, feminist fiction and poetry, with a worn futon in the corner. There is also a photograph of her alone in front of her childhood residence. She has no other personal belongings. It then gives us the transcript from Carmen Wagner's answer machine message that was left on the 19th of April 1995, where he rambles about the book and the way that the upstairs of the building go on and on and on, and he says that he hopes he eventually moves up there with the others. It then talks about Michelle Van Fitz at night. During the dark hours, her apartment grows to an enormous size and connects directly to the night floors, turning into airy rooms, book tables and plush couches, with shelves holding books, crystal tumblers, cigars and cigarettes, looking like a party that has just finished. Windows look into other book-filled rooms that seem to be infinite. The books are about history, zoology and science and look worn and used. She will not hear anybody knocking as she is elsewhere in the night floors, though if she is tracked down she will talk about how Wright is in an abusive relationship with that salesman on 6. If someone talks to her about The King in Yellow, she will enthusiastically discuss how it is a feminist play that portrays a patriarchal society shifting to a matriarchal one. On the shelves, should the agents look, there are a number of books that hint at the world of The King in Yellow and things that are yet to come. He details a number of example books that can be found on her shelves. Rather than go through each book, it's suffice to say that they all give clues relating to Carcosa, Yttil and the King in a variety of languages, though mostly English, and all of them, if read, give +1 corruption. We have another disinformation section where it talks about investigating Van Fitz. Of a day, she's defensive and really wants nothing to do with the agent. She will not invite them in and has no airs and graces. Should the agent manage to search her apartment, they can find a battered copy of the Red Book, and she will have a mild reaction to it vanishing, as it always seems to find its way back by the time night falls. As per the other tenant, her fridge is full of expired food that will instantly putrefy if taken from the building. At night, the north wall of the living room opens an archway to the night floors, with those agents who choose to pass through it gaining +1 corruption if they've not already gained any. The thousands of books in the rooms are stretched from her apartment. She will carry a can of mace and an antique tomahawk to deal with anyone who either tries to take her into custody, she believes who have taken any of her books, or believes will stop her entering the night floors, and she will fight to the death. The next section deals with the last tenant, Louis Post. But before we discuss him, it has a section called Acclamation, the sad story of Emmeline F. Fitzroy, child genius. Here we see the tale of Emmeline, a genius born into the Fitzroy pork fortune in Chicago. Ace Darabondi built a unique house for them, which came to be known as the Bellfleur House, that had curving rooms and strange sinuous lines, as well as odd spires of glass and metal. She could speak full sentences at 2 years old, read and write at 4 and wrote a poem by 5. At 10, she could speak 6 languages, had written complete manuscripts and completed a college-level programme with tutors. Her first book, A World Without Doors, was published on her 12th birthday. She was in the headlines for years, but this eventually faded, and she ultimately began to refuse to leave the Bellfleur house, with people often saying that they could hear her talking to herself in empty rooms. Her father died in 1941, and she remained there. She vanished in the Bellfleur house at the age of 26, leaving a note that read, "In an ending we find the world. The play is the only thing. All else orbits it as an afterthought. I go to him now because there is no other path, and I know now there never was." Her brother declared her dead in 1955, and it's listed as a suicide as her body was never discovered. Okay, so back to Louis Post. He is a comic book illustrator who seems to constantly be working. His apartment is a mess of litter, pizza boxes and dirty clothes, though he considers that this is his own business. He last turned in work on the 4th of May and has since been fired for avoiding phone calls and missing deadlines. He lives in the apartment above Abigail's at the front of the building and knows she is missing despite rarely seeing her. He has antisocial tendencies, though he will be polite and funny if being interviewed. Should his apartment be searched, a baroque mirror as tall as a person is found hidden under his bed. The right rolls will determine that it is from around the 1800s and is of Swiss or French manufacture. The food in the fridge behaves in the same way as the other apartments, with the same penalties for witnessing it putrefy. At night, things are very different. He looks into the baroque mirror, asking questions that are occasionally answered, though this is quiet and hard to hear. If asked about Abigail, he will just say that she moved in with someone upstairs. Anyone who looks into the mirror for over 10 minutes at night can see the vague reflection of a figure that disappears if looked at. It seems to be dancing. This causes sand loss and corruption gain. Also, Post's current work is a nightmarish composition of horrific imagery of drowned babies with the details left to the reader. It makes the point that if Post finds the agent in his room at night, he will attack them with a steak knife that he keeps with him and will not stop until killed or incapacitated. We have an Exeunt section called The Drowning Room. Post's drawings are of Asa Darabondi in his drowning room in Hotel Broadalbin, a place where he commits his crimes forever. If the agents have seen his photo, they will recognise him. It is possible that the agents can change the content of the room by adding items to Post's art, which would be shown in the reality of Broadalbin if they ever get there. More on that in another video. Agents can contact Post's agent, Mike Severs, an experienced representative for illustrators who has an office on the Upper East Side. He believes Post has lost his mind and ended his career in New York, claiming he could have been huge but just dropped off the map. This is the extent of his concern for Post. Okay, so now we have all of the tenants in place, we have the crux of this chapter, the night floors themselves. They're described as infinite and shifting rooms that can be accessed either via Michelle Van Fitter's apartment or the door to the roof of the building. They're a middle ground between the reality of Earth and the surreality of the night world, the borderlands of Carcosa. Only agents with at least +1 corruption can access the night floors. Those with 0 corruption just find an empty rooftop. They're defined as being more malleable than Earth but more stable than Carcosa, being moulded by intense thoughts and feelings. The stronger this is, the bigger the change. If someone believes strongly enough in something in the ninth floors, it can become reality for others, which could certainly be an issue. Single-minded people can cause extreme reactions. At night, the door opens into the smoking lounge and a hallway that leads to the apartment of Mr. Castaigne, the elusive night manager. These are both on the 4th floor. The ninth floors have a Victorian or Edwardian decor, varying from fine furnishings to cheap wallpaper. Some rooms are immaculate, while others are waterlogged rubbish piles. Voices can be heard and people spotted crossing distant intersections, though they can rarely be spoken to, vanishing as the agents approach. These are the remains of personalities consumed by the King in Yellow, destined to repeat their meaningless actions for eternity. Some on the ninth floor still have a sense of self and sometimes have odd motivations. Those are Mark Rourke, Mr. Castaigne, and the encyclopedia salesman, all existing in the ninth floors, trying to complete their earthly business. One of the constants of the ninth floors is the smoking lounge. This is always the first room that is encountered. It is a large area that resembles a 20th century gentleman's club, replete with velvet wallpaper, comfy chairs, a large warm fire and a bar stocked with everything one would require, as well as a walk-in humidor full of cigars. One of the walls is covered top to bottom with bookshelves, and all of the books contain antique pornography, with a range of activities that are described as breathtaking and elaborate, with many oddities that would have been found in turn-of-the-century sideshows. These books contain no text whatsoever. Optionally, some of the people in the images may look familiar to the agents, resembling the tenants or their bonds, or even the agents themselves. This is a potential small hit to San. We then have a piece of operation intelligence called Effects of the Ninth Floors that should be considered by the handler. Entering the ninth floors requires at least 1 point of corruption, though one can travel there with someone who is already corrupted. Each time someone moves location on the ninth floors, a SAN roll is required, with whoever is leading the way making the roll for everyone. If they fail, they move where they wanted to go. If they pass, they lose 1 SAN or willpower as they see how the ninth floors have changed. When they enter the ninth floors, they have a minimum number of manifestations equal to the highest corruption score of the group, after which, if they want to leave, they must declare it and fail a SAN roll. If they succeed the SAN roll, they fail to exit and encounter another manifestation, and this repeats until they find a way out. Time is different in the ninth floors. 6 hours is equal to a few seconds in our world. The landscape of doors, halls and rooms constantly shifts and changes, with the example of a door that once led to a staircase may open to an empty elevator shaft the next time it's breached, and these changes become more frequent the longer they stay there. An agent who loses more than 1 SAN on the ninth floors from an event or has 2 or more corruption can affect the reality of the ninth floors. Their imagination can come true, and it's down to the handler and never controllable by the player. Those who go temporarily insane on the ninth floors do not feel any effects until they return to the real world, with the most common thing being the desire to flee from the Macallister Building. Similarly, disorders do not manifest until the agent returns to the real world and include the likes of paranoia, sleeping disorders, dissociative identity disorder, phobias relating to enclosures, OCD, or depersonalization disorders. Those who hit 0 SAN on the ninth floors feel a compulsion to stay and explore, and the player should be encouraged to go along the just one more room route and take the group with them. Finally, when exiting the ninth floors after the required amount of manifestations, they always end up back at the smoking lounge with a view back to the Macallister Building. Okay, so now we've set the rules of the unruly ninth floors, let's take a look at the tenants of the upper floors of the Macallister Building at night. It makes the point that some ended up here by accident, while some through intense study, and all regret it and live as dark caricatures of their former selves. The first person detailed is David Langford, a cable TV repairman who's been trapped here since the 20th of March 1995. He ended up here when he attempted to disconnect the cable box junction on the top floor stair as day changed to night. It feels like he's been trapped here for around 6 months, living on old cake and hors d'oeuvres, flat champagne and stale beer. By some miracle, his sanity has only degraded a small amount, and he has managed to avoid interaction with the strange people that reside here. He makes a point of hiding until they've passed, and lives in a constant state of fear and confusion. If he hears the agents talking about police or federal matters, or sees drawn weapons, he will leap out and beg them to release him from his prison. Luckily, it's not too late for him, and he can be led from the ninth floors, with it even being possible that he recovers after psychotherapy or mental institutionalisation. The next character in the ninth floors is Mark Rourke. He has the dress, slang, bearing and ingrained bigotry of the 1930s. He is portly, with an awful wig, and is always nursing a drink and smoking a cigar. He's fit to explode even over the most innocuous of remarks, and holds essentially no respect for anybody but himself. He will refuse to be questioned by the police, though will respond to kindness. He's a repeater, a soul trapped in the night world forever who could never escape. He would claim he lives on the 7th floor of the hotel, and will, if pressed, tell the agent incredulously that it is Hotel Broadlebin. He knows all of the residents, including Abigail, who he refers to as a sweet kid, and claims she lives with that creep of a salesman on 6. He's not so open about his own life, though claims to know the night manager of the hotel, a man named Castaigne, and can guide the agents to his apartment. Otherwise, he's full of drunken anecdotes and abuse. Should the agents try to dig up details on him in the real world, they can find a Mark Armin Rourke in a missing persons file from 1933, an unmarried door-to-door salesman whose last known address was Hotel Broadlebin, New York, New York, with no address given. The next resident is the dog. It's a large, grey, long-haired mastiff that is slow, clumsy and obedient, and for some reason can travel about the Macallister Building day or night. He wanders around eating leftover party food and making a mess. Only visible to those with at least 2 corruption, those with a lower score only see the aftermath of him being around, never quite seeing him, which is a potential sun hit. We have the encyclopedia salesman. A corruption of 4 is required in order to encounter him, otherwise he is a figure in a pinstripe suit with 2-tone shoes holding a briefcase rushing past open doors or across hallways. Those with a corruption of 5 or more can see him more easily, though at a distance, and can never catch up with him, with other manifestations happening on their way to him. He is described as a soul without peace. Even after locating his soul bottle, he is doomed to wander the Macallister Building, hoping to lure others to a similar fate so they can keep him company. Agents should never meet him face to face. We have an exeunt called What's What, where it describes Rourke seeming to recognise the agent with the highest corruption rating, acting as if the agent is a confidant and friend. He will imply that he and the agent had escaped the booby hatch, ditched the G-men, and found their way to the tunnels, though he wasn't sure he would see them again since they found their bottle, but is glad to see them now. He will then beg them to help him return to the Whisper Labyrinth. Should they fail to play along, he will call them imposters. If they do play along, he could describe events that happen in the next chapter, though we will eventually realise that they are not who he thinks they are and storm off. We then have the author, a character who is never seen and only known about due to the pages of the play he leaves around the building. At night they can be faintly heard on the night floors, typing and listening to a phonograph record on a loop. Those who have at least 3 in corruption can find the author's room. It resembles a hotel room in a mess. There are sweat-stained clothes in the 1930s fashion, and empty bottles of bootleg hooch, and the whole room stinks of sweat and old smoke, though the author is never there. On the bed there is a small suitcase with the initials JCL on the lock plate. The typewriter that they can hear clacking away in the distance is a 1929 Remington Remette, which is on a small oak desk with blank paper scattered around it. The typewriter's print matches the pages of those that are around the Macallister Building. The old phonograph is an antique that will start playing when anyone examines it, causing a small sun hit. The song is Whatever Happened to Abby by Phil Hart and the Heartheps from 1928, and anybody who saw the clown at the beginning in Washington Square Park recognises the song, incurring another sun hit. After this we have the night manager, Henry de Calvados Castaigne. His apartment is rambling and cramped, and he is only seen outside of its doors at night. He's responsible for who stays in which apartment and does janitorial duties. He claims he works for the superintendent, but won't name them, and also has no knowledge of Artlife, denying they operate the building. He is old and limps when he walks, with unkempt white hair being compared looks-wise to a short, unwell Einstein. His clothing is old but exquisite, and looks to be late 19th century. He speaks with a faint accent that seems to be Central Europe or Russian, and if asked he will claim he speaks Tartessian, the language of an Iberian culture that didn't live beyond the Iron Age. He is quiet and courteous, and seems on the face of it to be kind, though it can feel like he's putting it on. He's hard to read, seeming both giving and secretive simultaneously. His apartment walls are lined with old black and white photos of undeterminate battlefields and bombed out cities with groups of people. They have odd inscriptions such as Downtown Tulips or Sovereign Carriage, and he may point out faces in the crowd saying things like Father, Mother, Anna, Christian, though won't talk beyond that other than to say they died during the war. If asked, he would claim he was born in a city or town called Carcosa, though does not care to discuss the old days. If asked directly about Abigail, he will say she lives on the 6th floor with the salesman, saying nothing more than they are quiet and they pay with cash. The apartment is stacked wall to wall with yellowed newspapers and magazines from before 1940, with some having bizarre headlines. This can cause a sand hit if thought about. His locked bedroom contains his prized possession, the Imperial Dynasty of America, a bundle of handwritten pages that track a complex lineage. Castaigne is amongst the names. If he sees it has been discovered, he will go into what is described as an ineffectual murderous frenzy, and if subdued, he will shriek that the crown is his. He is the cousin of Hildred Castaigne, who he has met, and both bitterly dispute the other's claims to the crown. Finally, we have the superintendent. This is Castaigne's euphemism for the king in yellow. If he is pushed on it, Castaigne may take an agent with 0 sand to meet the superintendent. If they agree, the journey will probably be their last and up to the handler to devise. He will not elaborate on the super other than saying he lives upstairs and is having a party. So the next section is Night Floor's manifestations. As these are quite in-depth, I'll try and keep them as brief as I can so as to not spoil the nature of them entirely for handlers. You really need to read some of them to believe them, and almost all of them have a sand hit. The first is Bottle. This involves framed black and white photos on a wall with people with blank faces staring at the camera. They're all holding bottles of various shapes and dressed in 30s clothes. Underneath each photo is a name written in ink, A. Darabondi, E. Mosby, you get the idea. The final photo is a single dark bottle on the floor, and the writing is that of the agent with the highest corruption. After this is Box. A door will open around 20 metres down a hall, and a set of arms places a box on the floor, and then the door shuts. The arms are those of a black man with burn scars on his wrists. The noise of distant applause can be heard while the door is open, and then vanishes as it shuts. The box contains the Hygromantia book in Latin, a dozen glass vials containing Melonia pods, more on those later, and a silver robe made of plastic. If the door is opened, it is a half-sized broom closet. The next is Chime. Without warning, a huge chime sounds, then fades to nothing. A few moments later, a group of people are seen running through a hallway ahead of them, wearing silver robes and white masks, and of course, when the agent arrives there, they're nowhere to be found. There's the Clockwork Child. A musical box can be heard nearby, and agents can locate the sounds to a child made of clockwork that rolls down a hallway slowly, its mouth clacking open and shut. It has an invitation pinned to the back addressed to Prisoner 125101, Ian Frederick de Craig, inviting him to a masquerade to celebrate the new king. If they turn their back on the child, it vanishes. There is the dance. The agents come upon an entire ballroom packed with human-sized marionettes dancing together, their strings disappearing into the darkness above. Waiters bring empty glasses to tables and a marionette band plays. They ignore the agents. There's the doctor. The agents will see a man in a Boston Red Sox windbreaker emerging from a door and walking quietly away from them. He won't acknowledge the agents at all and will enter another door saying 27. If the door is opened, it'll be an empty hotel room with no exits. If they wait, he will emerge around 2 minutes later and will continue entering doors, then exiting, and just smiles and nods if asked a question. He will fight if tackled and will use lethal force, and if captured, say nothing and look at his shoes. If dragged from the night floors, he will vanish, causing a sand hit. We have the Dream Guide. They will come upon a room full of books, and any one that is opened will be found to be The Dreaming Man's Library by Louis Lamb from 1941. It details a hobo that consumes books for food, and it will describe in great detail a dream that the agent once had. The dream is different in each book, and every agent who reads it sees a dream they had. There is Get 'em Boys. They will hear automatic gunfire from deep in the night floors and a male scream. If tracked down, they will find a huge empty ballroom that smells of gunpowder and a floor littered with strange tracks of blood with dozens of 45 shells. There's hors d'oeuvres. A smartly dressed waiter will appear and walk up to the investigators with a platter of hors d'oeuvres, speaking in an unknown language, but appearing friendly. If the snacks are examined, they have a single dead golden bug in the centre. It's a gold bug. More on those in a later video. There is Lifelike. They will find a solid gold goldfish sculpture in the middle of the floor that shows amazing craftsmanship. If someone puts it in their pocket, they will find a live one in its place a few minutes later. There's Like Clockwork. The agents hear a young girl singing in the distance. Quick search can find her in an empty dance hall, dancing to music from somewhere. Her form is covered with white gauze and she sings in an alien tongue. If the agents leave her, she winds down, her voice slowing until she freezes in place. If touched, she collapses in 1,000 clockwork pieces. If the cogs and wheels are examined, they find the maker's mark as G. Castaigne with FR 1435 stamped on them. we have lovers. The agents hear vigorous lovemaking which can be tracked down to a room. If opened, it is a hotel room with a bed covered in blood and shards of a chrome metal substance. On a table nearby is a cooking kit for heroin. Under the bedspread on the floor are 2 shotguns, and there is also a valise with $150,000 in D-Series 1933 bills covered in blood. On the wall is scrawled, "Where is my bottle?" in a blue-black ichor. There's nobody in here. There is masked men. 2 people run across the end of a distant hallway, followed by 3 men in gas masks carrying shotguns. Shotgun blasts can be heard after they pass, and when the agents reach the junction, they find 2 marionettes on the ground, blasted open by Bookshop, with clockwork and red tissue paper spilling out. They carry wallets with old New York ID cards for Eric K. Carter and Ronald Burbank, alongside money and other knickknacks from the period. The next section is called Disclamation, researching Eric K. Carter and Ronald Burbank. Should the agents search online, they can find a legal brief which indicates that Carter was murdered in an unnamed New York hotel in 1955. His wife and mother sued each other to obtain his possessions and pension. A search of the city criminal records will find 2 files. The first says that Burbank was arrested on the 1st of June 1953 at the American Museum of Natural History for breaking and entering. All charges were dropped. The second is a file that details the murder of Burbank and Carter at an unnamed hotel on the 9th of September 1955. The crime scene photo is black and white and shows them laid out in military jackets with the skin from their faces removed near to a pile of gas masks and shotguns. Griffith Virgil U is listed as a person of interest. If they ask Delta Green for information on them, they will receive this printout that indicates that they were part of some operations, though no information on the final mission, Bristol, can be found. Should they look into the military records of the pair of them, they will find that Carter was part of a special SS hunting detachment with theatre-wide clearance, a rare thing that meant he could move freely around Europe. Burbank was in the Marines and was injured in the Korean crisis of 1950 and sent home to convalesce. There's no indication they ever served together. Going back to the manifestations, we have mind the blank gap. In a distant doorway, a fat man sees the agents, then rushes to unlock a door with keys, looking nervous and guilty. If the door is opened, it swings open to an elevator shaft with no visible bottom. We have movie. The agents hear the distant rattling of a nearby machine and find a door with projection stencilled on it. It is suddenly pulled open from within, filling the hallway with machine noise. A small woman in overalls steps out. Should the agents talk to her, she tips her hands to her ears and points at the projector and walks off. Any attempt at stopping or subduing her will result in her vanishing. Inside the room, a giant projector pushes light through a tiny window. What is on the screen is too bright to see, but a tall figure in gold and silver can be seen sat near the front of an empty theatre. It will stand, turn and begin taking off a strange white mask. At this moment, the projector will emit a puff of smoke, sizzle, and the room goes black. The theatre cannot be entered by any means. There is the suicide. A young man in dated clothing turns a corner laughing and smiling with an invisible party. As he walks past the agent, any attempt to stop him shows he is immaterial, and as he passes he transforms. His skin changes to sallow and pale, his face becomes purple and swollen, his eyes bulge and then burst red, and a ghost rope tied in a noose will lift him from the ground, causing a sand hit. When clear of the agent, he will return to normal. He can be heard to be saying, "The ballroom, what do you want to show me?" We have the patients. The agents will come upon a few individuals in hospital gowns and slippers wandering aimlessly, lost in their own thoughts, making shapes in the air with their hands or singing to themselves. Some wear ID bracelets. These individuals are in the next chapter, a volume of secret faces, and may seem strangely familiar, even being the agent at a later date. There is restraints. They come upon a man in his 30s tied to a medical table in an empty hallway mumbling to himself. He cannot see them, but shouts and screams if they make him aware of their presence. He will say his name is Vega and beg to be set free, elaborating no more. If they say they're part of Delta Green, he will scream, "My name's Michael Whitwer, I'm a DEA agent from..." And then the floor opens and the table begins being lowered into a hole, with Michael shrieking in terror as he vanishes into the darkness. A distant, pale face with empty eye sockets looks back from an impossible distance below should someone look into the hole. We have the sea of windows. Anyone searching for a room with windows to the outside can finally come upon one that is shuttered and locked. If open, the windows will not show the outside, but an impossible view of an endless expanse of rooms, windows opening upon rooms with windows opening upon rooms. There is Stage. An agent will find a crack in the plaster between ceiling and a wall. If probed, it will all fall away like a house of cards to show the agent standing on a stage with reality being plywood props. The audience watching them is hundreds of human-sized marionettes. If the agents leave the stage, the marionettes will leave their seats and start filing out into the hallways. Next is summon. Shouting can be heard from a distant room, apparently an invocation to summon the demon person. If they follow the voice, they find an abandoned room with a smoking brass vessel marked with strange symbols and a pentagram etched onto the floor. Those skilled in the occult will find that the symbol is one associated with demonology, with the agent with the highest corruption catching a glimpse of gold and silver cloth disappearing through a doorway. Cannot be followed. We have the Whisper Labyrinth. The agents will find a narrow fracture in a plaster wall that opens to a cave that appears to be deep underground. There are chest-high alcoves that contain bottles of every description and a cool, dry wind blows through. There is digging equipment nearby. Those with corruption of 4 or more see the nearest bottle has their name marked on it, but they can't reach it. Anyone trying to climb into the cave hole has to make a dodge roll or suffer 2d6 damage as the stone collapses. If they remove the rubble, no tunnel can be found. And finally, the last manifestation is the sign. An agent will find a small piece of paper with a yellow sign marked on it from the Chicago Tribune on the 20th of August 1905. As the agent shows the symbol to the group, each one will ask one by one, "Tell me, have you seen the yellow sign?" They will be unaware of saying it, though they will have heard the others say it. Then we have the resolution. Abigail has moved to Carcosa and cannot be found. The agents may have deduced this and tried to avoid the same fate. The point of this operation is exploration and survival. Once the night floors have been found and examined, then the situation changes. Yes, Artlife plan on evicting the tenants, who will no doubt be placed under psychiatric examination, but that does not change the existence of the night floors. The only semi-permanent solution is to demolish or otherwise render it untenable. It suggests a truck bomb or burning it down, and even potentially Delta Green could buy the building from Artlife and then destroy it, or explore it, though that could be foolish. Even if this is the case, the route to the night floors remains. Copies of the King in Yellow are still out there somewhere, and the agents are marked and drag the power of the King behind them. The final section is in the field, we need to get out of here. Here it talks about how it is difficult for the agents to get the hint that they have to leave the night floors without Abigail. Finding her was never the mission. The whole idea is to get the agents to experience the night floors enough to leave an impression. If they insist on going deeper and deeper, it offers a few solutions. One of not so subtle, where NPCs can warn them to get out, with someone like Rourke or Castaigne telling them that they cannot find Abigail here and that she has moved on. There is invite them deeper, which puts the onus on what is to come on the shoulders of the players, and Pursuit, where some horror from the night floors bursts forth and chases the agents back to the smoking lounge. The next section is called A Volume of Secret Faces. The second part involves the agents who survived the night floors being called back to service 20 years later. They're sent to Boston to investigate patients from a mental health facility, Dorchester House, that is secretly a Delta Green affiliate. You are to use the 20-year hiatus between the two chapters to establish new connections, explain the new agents, or change the agents as they age. All agents need to take one new damaged veteran option from the agent's handbook, taking a second one if they already had one, but only if they want to. They have a 20-year vignette where the handler summarises the outcome, with the agents chiming in with things as long as it's brief. The period of time between the night floors and the next chapter bridges the gap of the Delta Green split into the programme and the outlaws. The players remain as outlaws. They can undertake many personal pursuits from the agent's handbook at this time, with a few caveats. Should they fumble a roll, someone close to them, a therapist, bond or other contact, starts being physically haunted by the remnants of the King in Yellow, and the agent gains +1 corruption. Additionally, any agent that chooses to stay on the case, who rolls a critical success or fumble, finds a dangerous lead. Full copy of the King in Yellow or the Deuxième Bureau file. Also, all agents must get rid of one bond due to alienation, betrayal or death, causing a sand hit but gaining them a new bond of the same score. When the campaign starts up 20 years later, the bond dissolved 20 years ago. One particular bond is handled differently and will have died in mid-2007 of a car accident, overdose, mugging or suicide, handler's choice. Should the agent want to dig deeper into this, they are being told that the bond saw a pretentious and unfinished indie film in Chicago that spring, which was interrupted by a stunt where people were acting like it was to be shut down. Details are shockingly hard to find on the event. If they find a contact who works at an ISP or arts contact, they can find out the name of a film, A Song Before Travel, which has no IMDb entry or online references. Should they pursue further, they can piece together that everyone who talked about seeing the film or have been involved died over the next few months, with the number sitting at around 200. At this point, their Delta Green contact orders them to stop investigating. All of the agents' bonds must have a symptom assigned to them, and if the bond score drops, the symptom will indicate the state of the relationship. This is followed by the stats for all of the Macallister Building tenants and residents of the night floors. The final part of this chapter is called Exeunt, the Bookshop. It makes the point that there are many entrances to the night world that fade in and out of existence, but that they are never truly gone. Placeholders remain. The Bookshop is one of those places. It's not a shop in the traditional sense, it is a moor that spews insanity to earth. It exists in multiple times and places on infinite earths and occasionally intersects with New York City, filling a void in reality that few can see. It is described as having a small cluttered window covered by a rusted steel security gate that is not really noticed and hardly remembered. It once had the word books painted on the inside of the window, but only traces of it remain and the door is broken and open. Sometimes the proprietor, a tall, smartly dressed man of North African descent who smokes Turkish cigarettes and wears a strange smile. He needs nothing from the outside world and never visits the nearby stores. This was the very bookshop that Issa Darabondi left his copy of Libro Secretorum Manifesta in the June of 1921 to try and escape his dark obsessions, and the place where Abigail Wright found her copy of The King in Yellow in February 1995. It makes the point that Darabondi and Wright even saw each other in the bookshop. Time is clearly optional in this place. Those who visit the bookshop stay there forever and can be found if you know how to find them. The proprietor wouldn't have it any other way. We have an op-in section called Locating the Bookshop. It discusses how clues to the bookshop can be found in the night floors and a volume of Secret Faces, and that residents of the night world may know how to find it, though they won't be released there until like a map made of skin. Thomas Wright may be able to take them there, as he has visited it, but there are no guarantees. It requires a number of factors such as mental state, time and circumstance to find it, and this is up to the handler. Those with an art skill of 40% or more, or at least 1 point in corruption, can ultimately find it, but will swear it wasn't there previously. Going inside the bookshop, there are rows and rows of meandering shelves piled high with books. Steps throughout go up and down, floors are uneven, and there are water-damaged parts and basements filled with literature that have sagging ceilings. It is narrow but goes deeper and further than it should. Those without a corruption score just see it as a bookshop, but to those corrupted enough it is a portal to places in the night world and beyond. If they have a corruption of 2 or more, there's nothing really unusual about it, other than it being cramped, narrow and badly looked after. Oddities can be found, but one book can always be found there, The King in Yellow in all its many myriad forms. If they have corruption of 3 or more, the strangeness of the shop is more noticeable. People can be heard wandering about even when the proprietor says they are alone. Books not from this earth can be found, and even people known to the agents but also known to be dead or missing can be glimpsed, and they can never really be caught up with. A corruption of 4 or more means that any customer that has ever visited the place can be found amongst the stacks, regardless of when they visited. If an agent understands this and intends to meet someone there, they gain +1 corruption. They can run into August Chastain, who looks ill and medieval and holds a copy of Leroy Maudit or the Accursed Kings. He'll speak in Old French about a door in the study which brought him here and the Book of the 72 Divine Shapes, explaining, if pressed, that a man called Baal, who he thinks is a demon sent by the devil, explained what they were. He will exchange names and then a gong will ring and he'll run off into the stacks, never to be found again. There is Issa Darabondi, a small, dark-haired, bespectacled Caucasian man in a lavender suit that those in the know can determine is 1920s fashion. He will speak with agents about design and architecture, stating that he feels that buildings may be designed to approach the divine, and that by doing so some of the divine is imbued into them. We have Dr. Elias Barbas, a tall, thin African-American man dressed in a long coat and in his 60s. He will talk in monosyllables unless The King in Yellow is mentioned, at which point he will start interrogating the agents about what they know about the play. If he thinks that they know too much, he swears at them and states that he will kill Wilde for what he has told you, and then vanish into the stacks. Anybody who chases him will see him disappearing into a small red door that shuts as they arrive. There is Emmett Mosby, a Caucasian man in his 40s who is short, balding and sweaty, who wears a pork pie hat and has 2-tone shoes. He's clever and willing to chat about literature and the occult, having vast knowledge on things like the Necronomicon. He would claim to be the author of The King in Yellow if it is brought into conversation. Normal chit-chat will reveal that he's been working too hard and is off to the continent for a vacation. The final person detailed is Robert R. Robert, the proprietor. He introduces himself as B.R. Robert and seems to be able to slide into conversations with ease. He will say to call him Bob, and his business card is a thick hand-pressed affair on vellum, which says simply B.R. Robert, Bibliopole, with no other details. He has a rough face, gaps between his teeth, and a small folding glasses with silver frames. He has a slight French-African accent with clipped diction. His clothes are a smorgasbord of Arabic tweed coats, silk socks from Gibraltar and the like. He is meticulously presented, and when talking at the bookshop, he will speak of it with disdain. He draws people into conversation which seems like minutes long but lasts hours, and always has something interesting to say, managing to draw secrets out of those he talks with. With regard to books and writing, he is a font of knowledge. He seems to have read everything and in different languages, encouraging discussion, and those to whom he talks to wander around the bookshop to search for what is hidden. He is a repeater caught forever in the pull of the night world that can never escape, but nor does he have any desire to. He will say that the bookshop has always existed, whether in the 1890s Paris or New York in 1921, 1925, 1929 and 1995. What happens outside the shop is of no concern to Robert. After this we go to the many manifestations that can happen within the bookshop, though it stresses that any of these can be used in the night world with minimal adjustment. The first one is the Patsu. This involves the agents hearing a whispered conversation nearby, clearly hearing a man say, "Patsu, this is the way out." If they dig through the books, they see people in a dark space who rush off before they can be identified. A few seconds later, a clown face lunges into view before vanishing. There's the dreaming man. The agents will find a man asleep on a top shelf. He will smile with yellow teeth and make a shushing gesture. If questioned, he will answer with cryptic answers that all seems to involve swimming and a lake of clouds, giving +1 corruption to anyone who does so. Anyone who tries to capture him causes the entire bookcase to topple, with Mr. Robert coming to investigate. After the collapse, the man can't be found, though a search will find a book with a cover that has a silhouette of a man that resembles the man on the shelf emblazoned on it. This is the dreaming man's library, as per earlier on in the night floors. We have the animal den. The agents are assaulted by the smell of animal urine in a darkened area underneath a burned out light bulb, with those with animal knowledge determining that it's from a large cat. Think like a cougar or a bobcat. The shelving here has collapsed and the books rendered into a large nest. Those who search the nest find lots of bones, most likely from pigeons, though the phalanges of human children can also be found. The proprietor knows nothing and is in fact dismayed to find this out. There is the room. Should any of the agents ask for a copy of The King in Yellow or any variant, the proprietor will take them through the darkened stacks for an impossible distance. Eventually he will pull up a trapdoor, climb down a few steps and illuminate the room via a string on a light bulb. Only one person can fit inside. It has bare stone walls and a dirt floor. The proprietor will then turn off the light and the agents can see a hand in the darkness pass a copy of the book to him. Then he will leave up the stairs, slam it shut and give it to the agents. If he is asked about who gave him the book, the proprietor will deny that anybody was there. Should they find the trapdoor again and open it, they will find a half-height crawl space full of bare cement and cobwebs, giving them a +1 corruption. We have shotguns, masks. They come upon a strange clearing in the bookcases that has a round bench in the centre surrounded by bookshelves full of books. Lying nearby is a crowbar, some wooden packing material and a small wooden crate. Underneath the bench is a smaller crate that contains packing material, a long leather trench coat, a full-size gas mask and a pump-action shotgun that looks new but is stamped as being made in 1954. Beneath this crate are 2 identical ones. Anyone who puts on the gas mask sees symbols etched onto the eyes, the yellow sign. A sand roll is needed and those who fail lose sand as they imagine picking up the gun and killing the other agents. Those who fumble their sand roll, put on the trench coat, pick up the shotgun and vanish into the stacks. If they're pursued, the mask-wearing agents start shooting. 4 days later, the agent will turn up wherever the other agents are, on half hit points, all but 1 willpower, +2 corruption, and no memory of the time in between. There is a distant play. The sound of an audience can be heard, distant laughter and applause, and then music. They hear a voice clearly acting that sounds like it is coming from beyond the bookshop, and those who follow it will come to a wall of the bookshelf where the sound is quite loud. Anyone who has read The King in Yellow can recognise snippets of it, then screams and shouts and the noise of people running on a stage. The sounds will then fade away. This is followed by a disinformation section on about Abigail Wright. Should the agent ask B.R. Robert about her, he is eager to help. He will pull out ledgers and open one. Everything inside is written in Arabic. He can recall Wright and her disappearance, tracking his finger down to a line that places her at the bookshop on the 22nd of February 1995. Those who can read Arabic can try a search roll while Robert pages through it. Failure reveals this line, which translates as, "and stood a while in thought." Success reveals these lines, which says, "He took his vorpal sword in hand, long time the manxome foe he sought, so rested he by the tum-tum tree and stood a while in thought." Robert will always lock the ledgers away in a strongbox no matter how distracted he gets. Anyone who somehow gets access to the ledgers will see that the Arabic line repeats every 28 lines, and the poem Jabberwocky by Lewis Carroll repeating again and again for over 1,000 pages. The entries are dated in French and the handwriting identical throughout. If he is confronted about this, he will laugh it off, claiming he has an eidetic memory and complete recall about every customer. This can be tested and he is correct. The last section in this chapter details the proprietor Robert, where it talks about his purpose and what he is waiting for. The last exeunt section of this chapter is called the Little Door. During the meeting with Dr. Barbas, he can flee through this door. It's just over 1/2 metre tall and 30 centimetres wide and has a large letterbox set into it. Opening the door reveals wrought iron bars that prevents access, with a stale-smelling room beyond. Shining light inside will reveal the inside of a rust-red closet with a normal-sized door on the other side. The space is piled with clothing. If any attempt is made to break through the bars, the whole thing collapses, and if the rubble is cleared, no room is present. It actually leads to the red door in Dr. Elias Barbas's bedroom closet. On occasion, a copy of the King and Yellow Red Book version is posted from the other side of the letterbox. Okay, that concludes part 3 of Impossible Landscapes. Part 4 will be a breakdown of the second part of the campaign, a volume of secret faces.